My name is Trisha Roy. I'm a vascular surgeon scientist at Houston Methodist, and my clinical practice and research practice is devoted to limb preservation. So this is a very humbling sport, and failure is part of what we do. But the question is, are we failing because this disease is truly unbeatable, or is it that we're not seeing it clearly enough to choose wisely? So that's what this talk is about. How do we see clearly beyond the angiogram so that we can make better decisions in complex PAD? These are my disclosures. This is one of our hybrid ORs at Houston Methodist. We have several of them. They're extraordinary. Robotics and advanced imaging and every device imaginable. And this is a procedure I still perform in these rooms, an amputation for gangrene. So we can edit genes, we can print organs, and yet in 2026, in a state-of-the-art hybrid suite, I am still cutting off limbs. This is a medieval problem in modern medicine, and the outcomes reflect that. 25% amputation, 20% mortality within a year. This isn't a technology gap, this is a decision gap. And if we're going to move these numbers, we have to understand why we're still here in the first place. We do have options, open bypass, endovascular therapy. We still don't reliably know who is better suited for which. Endovascular treatment has become the mainstay because it's less invasive, but it doesn't always work. There are 3 very predictable failure points in every intervention. Before we start, we can't cross. During the procedure, we injure the vessel, and afterwards, we restenose. These are not rare complications. They're built into every procedure we do, and yet it still feels like a surprise. And one reason is this. Angiography remains our gold standard, but it's only a luminogram. We can balloon a vessel and it looks beautiful, but under the microscope, we've fractured, dissected, disrupted the vessel wall, and it's completely invisible to us. So we're making really high stakes decisions based on shadows. And that's why our mission is precision peripheral vascular care, to advance imaging, to personalize treatment, to innovate interventions, and to save limbs and lives. We cannot fix what we cannot see, and sometimes what we can't see changes everything. This is our first mistake. If I don't see a target on angio, it isn't there. This is one of my patients. I did a selective popliteal injection, and I didn't see any pedal reconstitution, even on delays, a true desert foot. So by angiography, this is a no-option CLTI patient. But this is a patient who had a preoperative KISS MRI, which is a non-contrast MR angiography technique. And suddenly the story changes. The posterior tibial occlusion is short, the dorsalis pedis reconstitutes, there is a target. So what's happening here? Angiography takes pictures of contrast. If contrast doesn't reach a segment because of slow flow or timing or competitive flow, it simply disappears. With MRI, you're imaging the blood itself. It doesn't require contrast to traverse the entire vessel, and because of that, it reveals runoff that angiography actually misses. These are hibernating vessels. In our work, KISS detects significantly more posterior tibial and dorsalis pedis targets than digital subtraction angiography, and is more sensitive to runoff vessels. Because the lesions appear shorter, the task and glass scores are downgraded, and it fundamentally changes what options we think are available. These findings were recently published in the Journal of Vascular Surgery and recognized internationally, but more importantly, they've changed how we practice. This isn't about prettier imaging, it's about reclassifying patients from no option to treatable. And if we're going to debate bypass versus endo, we should at least be debating based on the full anatomy. So this is the first decision upgrade. No angio target does not mean no distal artery. For your next case, optimize your angiogram with delayed runs, selective injections, and before you declare someone no option, probe it with a wire. Sometimes the vessel isn't gone, it's just hibernating. And longer term, consider integrating KISS MRI into your workflow, especially in patients with renal impairment or when intervention is being considered. You can spare the kidneys and you get a more accurate map. Mistake number 2, I know what the lesion is. For years, I'd look at an angiogram and think, I know what to expect. This one's short, it's going to be easy. This one's long and calcified, I'm going to really struggle. But over and over again, I was wrong. And I'm not alone. From basal in 2005 to best CLI today, immediate technical failure rates have remained as high as 20%. And most of that failure is simple. It's because we can't cross the lesion. Our wires have improved, our devices have improved, our techniques have improved, but our success rates didn't. So maybe this isn't a skill problem, maybe it's a lesion problem. We were all taught in medical school that peripheral artery disease is just like coronary disease. It's atherosclerotic plaque, a lipid core that ruptures. But more and more, especially below the knee, that's not what we're dealing with. This is medial artery calcification, and it's a completely distinct process. These vessels don't occlude from classic plaque rupture. They likely occlude from slow flow and layered thrombus, and that organizes over time. So you get dense collagen, speckled calcium, fibrotic matrix. This is a very different phenotype of disease. And even calcification isn't one thing. We used to think of vascular calcium as inert, as an end-stage scar, but it's not. It is biologically active. There are stages to it. It's heterogeneous. It evolves. And that heterogeneity changes how your wire is going to behave and whether you'll be able to cross or make this intervention successful. So if crossability is the most common mode of immediate technical failure, how do we predict that before we start? And that's what we set out to do. We developed MRI signatures that correlate directly with the histology. And what we found was that lesion composition predicts crossability. And we put this to the test. We imaged patients before intervention. In this case, it was 43 patients, 86 lesions, and about a third were MRI defined as hard or uncrossable, and 2/3 the MRI defined it as soft. And overall, our immediate technical failure rate was 15%, almost entirely due to the inability to cross. So all of this tracks exactly with what the literature shows. But here's the difference. The MRI-defined hard lesions had a 40% immediate technical failure rate. The MRI-defined soft ones, 2%. This is not subtle. This is a mechanical phenotype that we can identify. This is one of those lesions. It's short, a task A, and nothing dramatic on angiography. But on MRI, with the imaging signatures it had, we could tell that it was a rock. Dense collagen, a very rigid matrix, and a very high-risk lesion. So this was an invisible lesion. It led to an unsuccessful attempt at an intervention, and this patient went on to major amputation. The lesion wasn't invisible on our MRI, and our understanding was just incomplete here. We've published this, and now it's funded under a NIH R01, where we're prospectively validating it in 100 patients. The takeaway is simple. Lesion composition predicts crossability. The length or the task score isn't the problem. The mechanical phenotype is. So this is the next decision upgrade. The length of the lesion or the degree of stenosis, those are not the features that are going to tell you if this is going to be an immediate technical failure. To implement that in your next case, just really pay attention to your first wire pass. It gives you diagnostic feedback, both visually and how it feels tactically. So if the wire is sailing, think of thrombotic components. If it feels like concrete, think of dense fibrotic phenotypes. And make sure that you're setting your escalation threshold early, because when you're repeatedly attempting this, it's not benign. But in the longer term, this is where we're going. We're incorporating mechanical phenotype into patient selection before the patient ever hits your table. And yes, we can consider bypass earlier in patients predicted to fail endovascular therapy, but you're doing bypass in those patients not because the best CLI told you so, but because this lesion in this patient is telling you it'll fail with an endovascular approach. Mistake number 3, this device. Now this is the device that's going to fix it all. We've built extraordinary devices over the past couple of decades. Lithotripsy, atherectomy, laser, drug-coated balloons, each of these introduced with so much optimism and each promised to solve the problem. And yet, in major randomized trials, very few have demonstrated durable, meaningful clinical benefit, and some have even shown some harm. So maybe the issue isn't whether the device is powerful enough. Maybe it's what the device is actually doing to the vessel wall. When we intervene, we're not just opening a lumen. We tear it, we fracture, we embolize, we disrupt calcium nodules, and most of that injury is completely invisible on angiography. So your final angio can look beautiful, but under histology, it's chaos. So we say, fine. If we injure the vessel, we'll control the response with drug. But even there, we're making some major assumptions. When you look at paclitaxel-coated balloons under scanning electron microscopy, you see how the drug is not evenly distributed. It sits in clusters and stripes. If the plaque surface is irregular, like nodular calcium, the transfer becomes really unpredictable. In some studies, less than 10% of the drug is actually making it to the vessel wall, and the rest is either lost in transit or washes downstream. So when trials like Basel 3 and SweetPad not show the benefit that we were hoping for, maybe this is part of the reason. The problem isn't that devices just don't work. The problem is that device performance is not universal. And that's why we built the peripheral vascular device core at Houston Methodist, so that the devices are failing in our laboratory before they ever fail in your patient. We test devices in real human disease. These are amputated limbs that were donated by CLTI patients. We image the limbs, we quantify the injury, we correlate the morphology with performance, and this doesn't just criticize innovation. It's really how we can understand failure and then use that failure as a blueprint for better design. With our PVD device core, we're changing global standards of how devices are developed and approved, and make sure that they're tested in real, complex human disease that we're dealing with every day. So we need high fidelity testing, and we need to understand whether devices are safe, whether they're effective, and how we can make them better for our patients. This is our next decision upgrade. Remember, device performance is not universal. So in your next case, consider tailoring the device to your lesion phenotype. Use IVUS or other imaging and try to pay attention to morphology. Not every lesion needs a maximal force. Not every lesion benefits from drug. And longer term, we're building towards a standardized morphology-based device selection and outcomes tracking. So 10 years ago, I wrote about tying device selection to plaque morphology, and I actually think that framework matters even more today. And the last mistake I'll discuss is, if it looks good, it will heal. I never did atherectomy in my training. I trained in Canada and it was very maligned. We did not do atherectomy. So when I started practice in Houston, Texas, I started doing it and it felt incredible. You see beautiful luminal gain, you take that final angio and it looks perfect. This is an example of one of those cases where the perineal artery was treated with orbital atherectomy and it looked really beautiful on my final angiography. And this patient actually ended up requiring an amputation due to progression of his infection. But when you see what that same segment looks like under the microscope, it just really surprised me. This is a vessel that isn't going to remodel. It's completely shredded, and it matters because that injury drives biology. When we look 6 months after atherectomy in some patients, this is what you see: layers of thrombus and neotomal hyperplasia, and a much more complex lesion than what you started with. So that final angiographic beauty does not equal biologic success. And sometimes the opposite happens. This patient had lithotripsy and a drug-coated balloon for a calcium nodule in the popliteal artery. On the final angio, it looked underwhelming. So in the MRIs, the calcium nodule is black on the top row, and then it's purple in the middle row. But yeah, you see that there's residual calcium and not a dramatic luminal gain. But because MRI is contrast-free and no radiation, we can actually follow these patients serially, and then the story changes. That lumen stays open because the whole vessel enlarges. You see this positive remodeling. So this is an example where the angio looked worse, but the biology was better, and that's a patient that healed. This is the final decision upgrade that we'll discuss. Your final angiogram is not the same as your final outcome. Success isn't about how good the luminal gain is at 4 p.m. tonight. It's how the vessel wall responds over time. And so for your next case, don't equate luminal gain with durable success, and look for uncontrolled dissections, zoom in, magnify, be honest with yourself, and consider completion imaging with IVUS or pedal acceleration time. But longer term, we really have to incorporate phenotype into our follow-up, differentiate technical failure from biologic response, and start recognizing recurrence patterns based on mechanism of injury. These mistakes and the decision upgrades that we've talked about, they're not random or abstract. They are a function of what we're actually learning in our lab. And we've organized that work around 3 main pillars: see it, treat it, know it. See it refers to our peripheral vascular translational imaging lab. So this is where we're developing the clinical tools like KISS MRA that you can use to reveal runoff vessels and define lesion biology all before you intervene. You're not guessing about the anatomy, you're selecting patients and planning procedures with intention. Treat it refers to our peripheral vascular device core. This is where we test devices in real human complex disease from amputated limbs donated by CLTI patients. And this is really important that we understand how devices behave so they fail in our lab before they ever touch your patient. We quantify the injury, we study the failure, and we refine performance. Innovation becomes informed, not just assumed. And know it is our biorepository. We've imaged, phenotyped, and correlated histology across hundreds of lesions. Because drilling and lasering calcium, that's all going to be temporary. If we truly want to change outcomes, we have to understand the biology driving the disease, the calcification phenotypes, the layered thrombus, remodeling patterns, and prevent these lesions before they ever occur. The future of PAD isn't just better tools, it's going to be deeper understanding. And all of this serves one simple goal: the right treatment, the first time, every time. We operate in a field where failure is so common with reintervention, restenosis, amputations, but I don't think we have to accept that as inevitable. But to get there, we do need collaboration, and if anything we discussed resonates with you, if you want to image differently or test differently or think differently, come visit us in Houston and let's build this together.